Welcome to Dementia Forum X YouTube channel. Today we are talking to Alex Kalache, the president of Brazil's Longevity Center. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you very much, Tobias. It's a pleasure to be here. I think that you would like me to introduce myself. As you said, my name is Alex Kalache. I'm the president of the International Longevity Center Brazil, which is part of an alliance of international centers around the world. We have 18 countries where we have an ILC. I'm a medical doctor. I graduated here in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, more specifically. But in 1975, I moved to England for my master's degree in public health. And it is when I discovered my interest on aging. For the first time, I was living in an aged country. It clicked on me. So I have been focused on aging since 1975. That is more than 45 years. And I did my academic research in England. I stayed at the universities of Oxford and London, did my PhD there, and created the unit on public health implications of aging in London after 7 years in Oxford. Then I moved to the World Health Organization, where I was the director of the program on aging and health from 1995 to 2008. And since then, therefore, for the last 12 years, I have been acting as a consultant for governments, international organizations, NGOs, national governments, international institutions like the UN, WHO, UNESCO. So my life has been very international from very early on, always focused on aging.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you have had a very interesting career, obviously. Would you like to tell me something more about how you got to be interested in aging and longevity? Like, what was it that made you interested in those topics?
When I arrived in England and I realized that I was in an aged country, I also discovered that most of the geriatricians in Britain were from developing countries, mostly from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, etc. So those were immigrant doctors that wouldn't find easy to compete with British qualified doctors. And therefore they would go to geriatric medicine because it was an easy way to make a career. The British qualified doctors were not interested in aging. And that amazed me. And I decided to do my master's degree research and try to find out the reasons why people choose geriatric medicine. And in choosing geriatric medicine, if they had job satisfaction. And there was one question in the survey that would identify those that had job satisfaction from those that did not. And that was early contact with family members, older people, especially grandparents, preferably living under the same roof. Well, that ticked the box because I was surrounded by older people. My family, extended family, family of immigrants from Mediterranean countries, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Lebanon. My father was born in Lebanon. And I had all these older people around me, including my grandmother, who I was very fond of. And when I was 15, she had a terminal cancer. And my mother asked me, as I had already expressed an interest to become a doctor, would you help me to look after your grandmother? And I did. I spent 3 years involved in the care. And that was a very important influence in my life, but I didn't know it was an influence that would turn into a professional choice. It was only once I got to Britain, did this study, and realized that, well, if people working on aging and with job satisfaction are those that have a very positive rapport with older people, that's me. But also, I started to realize that aging was not going to be only in developed countries. Life expectancy in Brazil was on the increase, fertility rates declining sharply, therefore less young people at the basis of the age structure, and more older people on the top. That is what has happened. We are in the process of being one of the fastest aging countries in the world, together with other developing countries such as China, Thailand, other countries in Asia and Latin America. So my interest was really influenced by my family experience in my childhood and adolescence, and then turning into a professional interest once I realized that the future is aging. It is going to be the main demographic trend in the 21st century. If anything, it has been happening faster than I could ever expect it. And it was the right choice. I have had, as you said, a very interesting career, and I have not stopped.
Yeah, very fascinating. And obviously, the aging population has been put through a really tough time during this past year. And that is obviously because of the pandemic. So I would love to ask you a little bit about this. So when COVID-19 started, what positive changes have you observed in Brazil for the elderly population and people living with dementia? Like, are there any specific examples of positive changes?
I haven't seen the positive changes yet. What I have been seeing is a tsunami of ageism. The government in our country expresses this clearly. Don't worry, if you contracted the coronavirus, but you are young and you are fit, nothing is going to happen to you. It is only for the old. They have already lived their lives. That's life. That's tough. And this is expressed especially by the very high up, the Minister of Health, the President of the country. So we have seen this tide of ages. And obviously, the message to older people is that we don't care. So what? You have already lived your lives. It is also a country that is characterized by a lot of inequality. Brazil has always been one of the most unequal countries. So it is particularly perverse for people that don't have assets, don't have the resources. They have to be confined, and they see the future of their children and grandchildren with very little hope. Unemployment has increased tremendously. It's not only that; it is you are not at school, but you don't have a work. So you have huge numbers of youth that see their future at risk, and this is very painful for someone at the end of their lives, seeing that their families are in such a precarious state. Having said that, in all crises and emergencies, and I know that because we conducted a study in 16 countries when I was directing the program at WHO, crises and emergencies on older people, in tsunamis, earthquakes, and wars, and droughts, and snowstorms. Older people are always among the most vulnerable, but also among the most resilient. We have seen things in the past. We have experienced other crises and emergencies. At the end of the day, we can hold the population together. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So this crisis will also pass, and we'll continue to do what we have always done, which is to embrace, to inspire, and to show people that there is a direction, that there is a future. Obviously, for people living with dementia, it is particularly tough because of the impact on the social network that they may have available, and because of confinement and restricting contact with other members of the family or friends, what was already a very difficult situation has become even worse. I'm saying this, I know what I'm saying, because my mother died 5 weeks ago in very old age with Alzheimer's disease. And we had to restrict the number of people that would be around her to protect her against coronavirus. But obviously, it had an impact on the quality of care that could be offered.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your mother. And it's strange to me that there is such a little regard for the elderly population, not only because it's so unempathetic, but also because we are all going to be elderly one day. So you would think that it is in our own interest to really care for the elderly. But it's strange that that is not the case.
I don't think that young people think about that. And I think that Cicero, more than 2,000 years ago, who wrote the first treatise about old people, he had warned us. You don't see yourself as an older person in the future. The older person is always somebody there, nothing to do with me. And for most people, old age comes abruptly because they don't face the fact that the best thing that can happen to you is to age. There are two alternatives. Either you age or you die early. Definitely the best option is to die as late as possible, but you have to ensure that there is quality of life as we're getting older. And it took about 2,000 years for the second important book about old age to be written. And that was by a feminist, Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote Old Age with the insight of seeing her partner, Sartre, getting older. And she calls attention to the resignification of the stages of life. You have constantly to look at yourself and to accept that you are getting older, to create your reserves so that you face the declines or the losses that you may have as you're getting older, as she was seeing her partner of whole life happening to him. And this resignification of life, it's something that all the younger people don't want to face. They think that they are going to be youth forever. You cannot have wrinkles, you cannot have white hair, you cannot lose your hair, you have to be beautiful, attractive, and you see as a menace to your identity if you start to contemplate, wow, time is passing, but I'm here. And therefore, the challenge is being... Actually, Cicero said that youth, young people, have a big challenge in front of them. This is 2,000 years when life expectancy in the Roman Empire was only 30 years. And he said that you, young people, have a challenge. You don't know if you're going to age. Us, older people, we have overcome that challenge. We have succeeded. So do the best you can to get older, because it's not taken for granted.
Yeah, well, that's a very good answer. And, one of the best lessons for the younger population is that they will too age if they are lucky. Yeah, exactly. But let's move on to the next question. So, and that is about like the challenges that has been put forward during the pandemic for the elderly, like specific challenges. Do you have any examples of those, and maybe what can be done to counter those challenges?
The main challenge is to do with loneliness. We had already been living an epidemic of loneliness throughout the world, especially in developed countries, but also in developing countries where we have many people that live alone, particularly women. There is a very important gender dimension on this. Women so often are married to older men. They eventually die under her care, the woman's care. And then as they get older, for a number of reasons, they may not have many children, children immigrate, and there's fragmentation of families and distance. In big cities, you have problems to do with transport. You want to see your mother, but you live far away, and takes an hour and a half by not good public transport. All this combined makes loneliness also a problem in developing countries. And then there is inequality. People that don't have the assets to invite people so that they can come, or that they are excluded from society territorially. They live far away from the church or the medical doctor or their families. So your life starts to become restricted to a very small bubble. With the pandemic, all this came to the fore. And the main associated problem with the pandemic is that people had to be confined, social isolation, to protect themselves, and often without the assets, without even knowing if they would have enough to eat or enough resources to pay the electricity bill. Very basic things that, of course, if you live in a developed country, you don't even think about. The challenge to this is that developed countries first got rich and then got old. Developing countries are aging much faster, much more rapidly, in poverty. And in addition to poverty, we have inequality. So for a few that are on the top of the socioeconomic pyramid, life is good. But at the base, you have people that are suffering, struggling. And if they have in the family somebody that needs care, for instance, with Alzheimer's disease, it is extremely difficult. The whole family can be sucked into a spiral of problems that has no end.
Yeah, and obviously these problems has always been there, but the pandemic has kind of put them on the map like never before. Have you also seen new attempts as addressing these problems because of the pandemic? Has the pandemic kind of taught us anything?
Yeah, what we have seen is spontaneously in different communities is a wave of spontaneous. It's not orchestrated by the government, unfortunately, because I think that the government should have done much more. But spontaneously, especially in poorer quarters of the cities, the organization of movements and networks of solidarity, to reach out, to find another person. When the pandemic started, my center started a campaign, which was basically express your solidarity to someone that is living in isolation. Find a neighbor, find someone in your block. You know your community. Knock at the door with respect and keeping social distance. Ask this person if this person needs help for shopping, but also to have a chat. Stimulate the use of technology. In Brazil, pretty well everybody has a smartphone, but older people are less likely to be able to use it efficiently. So you find now spontaneously in the community younger people that are, whatever way they find, trying to make older people more familiar with devices that can break that loneliness.
Absolutely, and that's like altruism has kind of spontaneously popped up, and it's also great advice to seek out the people near you. But if we look on a larger perspective, how has the pandemic impacted Brazil as a whole? Do you see any long-term effects on the country looking forward?
It's early to say, but I think that there will be. The most important is that we are denying that there is a crisis. You may be aware that we are talking in February. This is the month that we have Carnival in Brazil. It's the big party. Obviously, the big parades and big celebrations have been cancelled. But I can hear from my apartment that there are smaller groups, but they are celebrating. They are on television all the time, finding agglomerations. People are disrespecting the fact that we are in a period of mourning. We have already lost 250,000 people that dying from COVID, plus many more that are dying from complications of diseases because they have not been able to reach hospital care in time, strokes, myocardial infarction, cancer. So you also have complications. There's also sub-notification. In Brazil, we estimate that 1/3 of deaths from COVID are not even classified or diagnosed. So the total number is probably close to 350,000. We are still a relatively young country. We have 14% of the population aged 60 and over. If we would have the same age structure of, say, Sweden, Italy, or Spain, with more older people, therefore more people at high risk, we would easily be 500,000. When there is death, there is mourning, grief. You need consolation. You have families that are traumatized, and they are not receiving the support, the social support, even from their friends, because of social distance, because of social isolation. I tell you this week the tragedy of a friend of mine who was only 53, a medical doctor. He died from COVID because it also happens. It's not only older people. In Brazil, about 30% of the deaths are people under the age of 60 because they often have diabetes, cardiovascular problems, respiratory diseases, hypertension, the core morbidities that come earlier because of the conditions that so many people live. They cannot do physical activity or have a good diet or have a good medical treatment. It's not the case of this medical doctor, I'm telling you. Unfortunately, he contracted the COVID. He had a precondition, obesity. He died on Monday this week, and on Thursday, his twin brother died also from COVID, leaving behind the widow, who is an older woman, aged 87, who lived with one of her sons, and she has Alzheimer's disease. Can you imagine what a tragic circumstance?
Yeah, that's really tragic. And I mean, it can feel really hopeless at times, clearly. Do you see any changes that would make aging easier in Brazil and other countries in the near future? What problems and foremost opportunities do you see? Is there any silver lining here, or?
Yes, there is something that I am seeing as a positive impact of the COVID. Brazil is one of the few developing countries with a national health system, which is modeled on the British national health system, and not very different from most of the health systems in Europe. So it is universal. You have the right to medical services. and you don't have to pay at the point of receiving. Having said that, the quality is poor, and we have to improve. But you have family doctors and family care teams throughout the country in health centers. This was created about 30 years ago, and the current government was undermining, since the election of this current administration, the plan, the project was to privatize. And all the progress that had been done over 30 years was under risk. I think that what COVID has shown absolutely clear is that what is saving lives, what is really important, is the existence of these health centers in the favelas, in all the slum areas, in poor rural communities. You always have there this amazing network of very committed health professionals that were being undervalued. And now, because of the COVID and the response, the population as a whole, and even the government, has had to concede that this is precious. Without the universal health system that we have implemented here, the tragedy could be much worse. So my hope is that as a result of COVID, the national health system will be better supported with more resources and will be strengthened, because there is a wide recognition, acknowledgement. They are the heroes of this tragedy called the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I really hope so. And also, do you think like the political opinion will change after the pandemic, and that people might, for example, vote differently next election, partly because of the things they have seen during this time and the things that has been exposed?
You are asking the question to the wrong person, because I was already convinced that we had the worst possible government. Fundamentalist, alt-right, their concern is to arm people, to provide more weapons, to privatize, ultra-liberal agenda. So I was already in frontal opposition to the government. And I think that their response to the pandemic couldn't have been worse. Anti-scientific. Until last month, the president was promising everybody, if you get early treatment and take chloroquine, chloroquine is a medicine for malaria, the same as Trump. And Trump donated 4 million doses of chloroquine because, of course, they came to the realization that was worth nothing. But here, the president and all the high levels of his cabinet ministers, many of them were infected with COVID. And they took all these magic pills when the whole scientific community, WHO, the best medical journals throughout the world saying this is rubbish, there is no evidence. But their lack of understanding of science and health illiteracy has been responsible for killing many people, because people thought that, oh no, I'm taking this pill, I will be all right. And by the time they would get to hospital, it would be too late. So the irresponsibility is appalling. But you still have, like Trump. Trump had 71 million voters. My country is also divided. You still have fundamentalist believers, fanatical supporters of this alt-right government. So I don't know if their response, or better saying, the lack of response or the wrong response, is going to be translated 2 years from now into better results at the election. I keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah, really. Let's hope that that people are waking up to these problems and that realizing that they do need some to be solved, and with better policies and decisions. Clearly, for my last questions, I would like us to focus a little bit more on the far future, if you don't mind. And like, I would like to ask you then, if medicine continues to advance like it is today, what will aging be like in 20 or 30 years from now? Are you optimistic in that regard?
Brazil is a country where you have a smartphone in your hand and your feet in the sewage. 50% of the population of Brazil don't have sewage treatment. You have at least 33 million people. That's more than 3 times the population of Sweden without water supply. We are a population of 220 million. The bottom 50%, the poorest, have seen their income declining by 37%. So they're much poorer than they were a year ago. But those at the top, the 10% at the top, they only lost 3% compared to 37%. And the 1% at the very top, the billionaires, are richer now than they were before, 17% richer. So inequality is increasing. So what can I say 20 years from now? If we don't face head-on inequalities, we are going to be a failed country. Because if young people today don't have good education, don't have lifelong learning, don't acquire new jobs, new possibilities for a job, you have to open the range of possibilities. So if you lose your job as a car mechanic, you have other skills that will offer you another opportunity. But you need investment. So it's not only schooling for children, it's for lifelong learning, including for people that are getting into old age. Because the pension is far too small for them to have or to guarantee food in their shelves in the kitchen, or minimum money to pay the electricity and gas bill, or the medicine that they may need. So the most important challenge is how a country can age so fast, so rapidly, without having had time, for lack of resources, to replace family care by the care provided by the state. It's a question of rights. We need a rights-based approach. And in this regard, Tobias, I have to criticize developed countries. We developing countries have been on this battle at the United Nations. I know because I go often there as a global ambassador for Help Aid International, with all the credentials that I have accumulated throughout my life. And we go there as activists. We need a convention on rights of older people. They need to be protected. We have 750 million people today aged 60 and over. In 2050, this is only 30 years from now, there will be 2,100 million. And most of the growth is in the developing world. We demand, we need rights, a rights-based approach, but without a convention, the governments are going to ignore our rights. But what you, developed countries, are doing, you object to it, you block, because if you have your right recognized, it means that you have entitlements. And your governments, throughout the European Union, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, all developed world, is saying, no, we don't need a convention. It's a question of implementing the good laws that we already have. And then we shout and say, no, we don't. We don't have those good laws. And this is why we need a convention. That is how the rights of children, women, immigrants, indigenous populations, people living with physical disabilities, that is how we made progress. Now we need, for the fastest growing segment of the population, older people, it is incoherent that you are trying to block progress. So the first country in the developed world that will recognize the need for a convention of rights at the UN level will have all my respect. But so far, I cannot identify a single one. And that includes the rights of people living with dementia and the rights of their carers, especially women, because they have to spend the whole of their lives looking after their children, then their parents or grandparents and their husbands, who usually are older than them, often with dementia. And there is one thing to this. The most important in a context like ours, risk factor that you can modify is poor education. We know that people with low educational level will have a much higher risk of presenting dementia early. You don't wait until you are 90. You get into 60 with very small cognitive reserves. That combined with another risk factor for dementia, hypertension, which is underdiagnosed and undertreated, you combine these two, the result of poverty, lack of knowledge, lack of intellectual development, and physical problems like hypertension and diabetes, all this converge into a time bomb that we may have in the near future with this advanced aging of the population, an explosion of the cases of dementia, unless we find the treatment.
Right. Clearly, we have to do a lot, and we can only hope that we choose the right path forward into the future. But anyway, that was all my questions. So thank you for being here with me today and answering my questions. It was very interesting to listen to you, and I hope that we can talk again sometime in the future. Thank you.
I'm here. Thank you.